Beside these global challenges that the Prime Minister outlined, we've already seeing on the not-so-distant horizon a wealth of other issues that are coming up and which the UN's got to be ready to handle. I mentioned water as one, but migration and energy security are two others which are critical if we are to tackle the challenges ahead. But I said that institutional reform is only part of the answer. And the truth is that I think institutions, indeed governments, can't do it alone. We've got to convince the world as well as of the pragmatic as well as the inherent value of our institutions. We can begin to lift the aura of mystery, skepticism, even paranoia in which many countries and peoples still cloak these institutions. But if the world is to be convinced of this good to it and the human condition of the UN and the World Bank and others, a wider movement of support is required, a real mobilization of civil society, and that's where an organization like the UNA is such a critical hinge and link between the UN on the one hand, but the broader global civil society on the other. And it is across civil society in all its manifestations, media, academics, organizations such as your own, development NGOs, active NGOs devoted to human rights and other cause-oriented objectives, across all these groups, international business. I detect a great momentum for change, much greater, frankly, than in most governments around the world. I see the desire to reflect and to debate how we can shape international institutions to deal with these emerging problems. An international system that would build on its achievements to date while responding effectively to what lies ahead. An international institution that makes globalization, and this wave of it I think is far from past, work to everyone's advantage, not just allow it to become a globalization for the rich. So I think one way or another, global ways of managing our global affairs will emerge. From civil society to business, from public health to terrorism, there are just too many reasons why they must. None of these problems can anymore be handled at the national level alone. But it is up to people like us to make sure that the platform for this new international management of global problems is the UN, and that is our challenge, because it won't happen on its own. I think the skepticism that I mentioned of at least one American presidential candidate is echoed across much of the world, where there is a sense in many places, people ask the question, maybe the UN is a hostage of its history, a creature of 1945, which cannot retool itself for today's world. Now, in your audience today, well, most notably David Haney himself, who was part of the panel that, for the Secretary General, wrote the main reform plan from which the idea of Security Council enlargement has come. Many others of you have contributed in many other different ways to the idea of the United Nations and the promotion of that idea in your communities across Britain. And I suppose my message today is, one sense, perhaps not in 60 years has the opportunity been better, where globalization has thrown up global issues, where a government such as Britain's has recognized that its means of managing those global issues requires it to strengthen a United Nations platform on which it can act and in which it has every opportunity to be effective because of its links and relationships and its history. But that if indeed the UN fails it, it will be networks of civil society organizations, it will be the World Bank, it will be one-off institutions put in place to address particular public health issues or other things, which will become a kind of new patchwork of international institutions. The UN's place in this cannot be taken for granted. It will only be vigorous work on the inside and the outside of the institution, which enables us to make it an institution fit for 21st century purpose. Thank you.